Hi, I'm Dajana Yoakley. I'm a peaceful parenting coach and mom of three, and I am delighted to give you the latest science backed research on child development, parenting, and to support you in showing up as the parent that you want to be. Welcome. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today on another really exciting episode today. I have here with me Daniel Ellenberg. Welcome, Daniel. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Happy to be here with you, Dajana.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're here. So I'm going to share a little bit about Daniel's background, and then we'll get into our conversation for today, which is going to be about how we can raise more compassionate and vulnerable boys and help change the culture of masculinity as parents and ultimately starting in our own homes and our relationships with our sons and how we impact our daughters as well and educate them about these. So Daniel Ellenberg, PhD, is a founder of Strength with Heart Men's Group and Workshops, and he's a past president of the American Psychological Association's Division on Men and Masculinities, and is the founder director of the Men and Boys Compassion Coalition. He serves on the boards of the Global Compassion Coalition and Wellspring Institute of Neuroscience and Contemplative Wisdom, and the advisory boards of GCC and APA Future of Work. He's the principal on the Rewire Leadership Institute, where he does leadership coaching and team development. He's also a co-founder of Relationships at Work, which formerly housed his practice, therapy practice with individuals, couples, and groups. So as you can see, Daniel has a ton of experience on this topic, and I'm really excited to have him here so I can pick his brain and break things down in a very practical way that we can start implementing in our homes as parents. So yeah, Daniel, I'm really excited about this topic. I don't know if you'd like to share a little bit more about kind of how this kind of kick us off, and then we'll weave in some questions about your work in helping men and boys connect more deeply with their emotions.
I mean, to share more about this topic on some level is to talk about the way the world is constructed.
Yes.
One of the things that I've seen, and I think people are slowly beginning to see, is that the topic of masculinity is everywhere. I mean, it's in
Mhm.
politics for sure. It's in sports, obviously. It's in business. It's in marriage and families and child rearing. It's everywhere you look, but it's often hidden. It's kind of like the water to the fish. We don't even notice its influences. And so part of what I hope to do with you today is to start teasing apart some of the messages and messaging that lead to some of the outcomes that we have, and hopefully really looking toward how do we shift some of those. My intention is not to badify boys, men, masculinity. I think there's been a lot of this unfortunate terminology like toxic masculinity. And, it's bad messaging to guys because when you say masculinity, guys are kind of going like, well, you're calling me toxic because I
Right.
tend to identify with that. So I don't even like to use the word masculinity, frankly, or
Uh-huh.
femininity. I think that
Yeah.
it's an unfortunate lens because we create a world where we go, oh, well, this is masculine behavior and this is feminine behavior, and boys shouldn't be doing feminine things. And unfortunately, many of those quote feminine things are very relational and are very essential to, for example, child rearing. So it is a sad thing, and I find myself in the vast minority of people who don't like to use the term. But
Yeah.
be that as it may, we still need to address it.
And I appreciate that because it has such a negative connotation nowadays. But I like what you're saying, which is that boys and girls can have these similar traits across the board. It's a holistic approach, and it's a matter of how we like use it in the world instead of tying it to identity and because I think when we think of like toxic masculinity and kind of separation between the two genders, we're kind of saying this isn't for boys or this isn't for girls. And that really, from an emotional development perspective and mental health perspective, it cuts people off and it doesn't allow them to be their full spectrum self of possibilities, right? The full human experience, right?
Exactly. I mean, that's what's so sad to me. Like I never quite understood. I mean, I understand how it develops, but I don't. I'm not supportive of it, which is that every human being has a full range of possible human attitudes and behaviors. Now, certainly there are some biological implications, and people are
Right.
born differently. I mean, I think it's foolish to say that all behavior is socially constructed, which is what some people think, but it's also foolish to think it's all biologically driven.
Right.
So there's some relationship there. And so what we
Hmm.
want to do is to acknowledge that there are biological differences, but not harp on those. So the idea that, for example, girls and women can't be aggressive or they shouldn't be aggressive. Of course, aggression can be used in different ways. It can be used in the service of something that's pro-social. It can be
Right.
used in service of something that's antisocial or asocial. But I'm of the
Hmm.
belief that we want to basically open the palette so that we so that whoever you are, you can show up as yourself and not be judged for that you should be more of this or less of that or something like that. And
Yeah.
some guys are just more aggressive. I mean, there are biological differences, and so if we look at charts, that there are ways that males and females intersect and overlap, and there are ways that there are differences. But those differences are not seen in one necessarily individual. They're just
Right.
tendencies there. And if we get caught up
Hmm.
in therefore you should be this way because you are a girl or you are a boy, that's a problem.
Yeah, and that's a problem in a real, very real way for parents, I think, because when we're talking about emotional intelligence and raising healthy, emotionally healthy kids, it's really tough to raise boys to process emotions when they're feeling frustrated if their culture and society and their peer groups are telling them by the time you hit 12, 13, you're not allowed to cry anymore. And so now, how are they supposed to process without tears? They don't. And so I'm wondering, if you can kind of take us back in time, what are some of those early messages boys receive from, that disconnect them from their natural capacity? Because at age 3, you probably don't see any difference in genders in terms of emotional processing. I mean, anecdotal evidence, I'm not a scientist, but that's kind of what I see in parenting. If the parent changes and they create safety, the 3-year-old will cry, whether it's a boy or a girl or whatever gender, right? But by age 13, there's distinct differences.
I
Granted, there's
think,
puberty as well, so there's hormones at play, but yeah, if you can walk us through that.
well, I think you're being actually very liberal when you say 12 or 13. I think it's really more like 4 or 5, 6.
Wow, yeah,
It starts very early. And obviously, over time, it becomes more pronounced. So I would agree that 12,
yeah.
13 becomes more intensified. But those messages start super early. Like I have a
Hmm.
friend, colleague, who has a 5-year-old boy, who has longish hair, and he's a sweet boy, and
Hmm.
he started being called a girl at school by his classmates at 5 years old. And he came home crying one day, and his father, who was a very emotionally aware and compassionate man, just took him aside and said, you don't need to listen to this message. You're gonna get messages like that out of
Yeah,
the world because that's the way the world is. But I want you to know that I'm here for you, and I want to encourage your full. I mean, he uses little boy words for that, but he's basically saying, "I love and accept you as you are, and I want
right,
I want you to embrace that and really have the courage and strength to resist some of these very limiting and limited cultural messages, which I think
right,
is going to be a very important message for parents because the world is the way the world is. Gee, that's a revelatory statement, huh? So
yeah,
I mean, and the messages are out there. And I, as someone who's been involved with what I would call male evolution, male transformation for over 40 years at this point, and honestly, sadly disappointed, that the world hasn't changed more. I definitely thought it would be more evolved, and as much
yeah,
as things can change, and they have changed in certain ways, certainly, but those forces are so powerful and I think so regressive that they keep pulling us into the emotional underworld. And we have to counteract that. And avoidance is not the answer. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
I had an old client who was like really harassed as a boy, when he was growing up. I think he's like 50 now, and he didn't tell his parents. Like no one knew about it. His older brother, his
Yeah.
sister, nobody knew about it. And he felt embarrassed, about that. He didn't want to burden them. Now, a lot of times parents kind of see no evil, hear no evil type thing, but you have to kind of like watch your kid, what's going on, with your kid,
Hmm.
pay attention there and actually inquire rather than assume or wait, for the child to disclose difficulties that they have.
Yeah.
And, the
Yeah.
reality is that your parents have been steeped in the same culture, relatively speaking, that the child is. And so they've gotten those
Right.
messages. You know, uh, uh, I think that when we think about how the brains develop and getting these messages that become part of one's belief system and identity,
Uh-huh.
it's very hard to separate
Yes.
yourself from
Yes.
that. And so it does take some emotional and psychological work to go like, what's really healthy? And fortunately, there are increasing areas like what you're doing right now, that are giving people, parents, opportunities to see things differently rather than keep going by rote with what has been
Hmm.
previously.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I work with parents, I find that a lot of parents' motivation comes when there's pain points.
Shocking.
That's when they start to discover more consciousness, more mindfulness, stress reduction. It's like when you get a diagnosis or when your kid is struggling in class that they're kicking him out of school, or, your kid is so aggressive that whatever, it's just really hard, or you just keep yelling at them and it's really hard to stop and you feel shame and guilt. So I feel like often out of troubled times, we have a motivation to come out of that suffering, and then we're more receptive to shifting identities. But yeah, if everything's kind of, even if it's stable misery, if it's stable and there's not a disruption, it's hard for people to shift out of that identity, even if they don't
Yeah, well,
necessarily agree with it. It's like, well, I'm too comfortable to stir up a whole thing. And
exactly. I mean, people are much more likely change because they feel the heat than because they see the light. So
right.
I mean, I don't think there's any question that it's a kind of survival thing. Like if the pain gets big enough, the comfort becomes not so comfortable. And
Right.
people are, driven by what the familiar comfort zone.
Yeah. Yeah.
As one of my first supervisors said to me many, many moons ago, be it ever so shitty, there's no place like home. That's
Exactly.
and
The
that's
comfort of the familiarity, even if it's scary or dangerous, right? Even in
yeah.
like child abuse cases and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's at least certainty, in that.
Right.
But the uncertainty of trying something new, it can feel psychologically destabilizing, and most people won't kind of walk out, from that. And it's part of human nature, and
Yeah.
human psychology that we resist change.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah,
Until something pushes us so far where the only option is you can't resist anymore. Now it's kind of sink or swim, right?
resistance is futile, finally.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of people that listen, probably everybody that listens to my podcast is at the point where they've been enlightened by conscious parenting, peaceful parenting, and they want to raise kids differently than they were raised, based on traditional parenting. So they're trying to raise kids with more science-backed approaches, but it can still be really hard with society, of course, like with culture, but also now with social media for, influencing kids' own perceptions, and parents that are trying to do this work. They're constantly like, it's like a war zone, literally, like information war zone and cultural impact war zone. I don't know. I know I feel it. And that's not even, the kids aren't even reading the news yet. This is just like social circles, right? Like once you get into the news and the information age piece with when the kids get old enough, like teenage years, it becomes even harder with the manosphere and like these influencers on both sides for women and for men. But I'm wondering if you have some thoughts about how parents can counteract that influence at home, because they can't control the world, like you said, but they can control what happens within the walls of their home until their kid is old enough to move out. So, what are some
Right.
things they could do at home with boys, particularly
Right.
related to this?
Right. Well, I think a lot of parents are frankly quite ignorant about what their sons are actually listening to and watching. You know, they kind of, oh, they're on their phone, and like, what could go wrong, right? And
Yeah.
they don't supervise enough. I mean, it's very weird in a certain way because in the outer world, parents have become increasingly anxious about what's going to happen with their children and the safety factors. You know, okay, probably a little bit too much, like my perception there. But in the inner world, not enough, not
Yeah.
nearly enough. And so they're not really checking what's going on their phones. And like, I would just at times, I want to see your phone. You know, like
Hmm.
they shouldn't, little, teenagers or younger shouldn't have complete carte blanche ability to just do whatever they want to do. And so obviously that can be some tension there because, in adolescence, one of the things you want to do is create independence. But
Yeah.
part of what we look at there is a relationship between kind of freedom, so to speak, and responsibility. And so
Right.
what are they doing? What are they looking at? And to show interest in that, because
Hmm.
so many parents are understandably anxious about money, anxious about, getting their paycheck, paying their rent or their mortgage, and they think they could get subsumed or they have parental conflicts there, and the kids can go by the wayside. But when you are unduly optimistic about how things are going quite swimmingly and there won't be a problem, that in and of itself can be the biggest problem of all. So you have to
Yeah.
be more supervision. So that's one thing I think
Hmm.
is really important. Another has to do with community building. Parents, excuse me, parents often feel very alone, in
Yeah.
the process,
Yeah.
and you can be very, kind of isolated. And so I think it's very important to have more of a community sense and talking with other parents, finding out what's going on with their sons, daughters also, but we're talking about sons in particular, right?
Right.
And so you're sharing resources and you're finding out what's happening here and there. And I think a lot of times parents are so status conscious, because that's part of what human beings do, that they don't want others to think that they have dirty laundry. But the reality is we all do, and so to me, I go like, get over it. I don't mean that in a harsh way, but
Right.
in a way that we are just kind of just accepting the fact that life is difficult and there are challenges. It's beautiful also. It's got its beauty and its horrors. And we have to,
Yeah.
as much as possible, control for the horrors, and undue optimism is not a good path forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you're touching on this because I think from what I see with parents, they are focused on screens, but on the wrong aspect. Well, not the wrong aspect of screens, but one aspect, which is screen time. Hearing a lot about right now about
Right.
screen addictions, dopamine, especially kids with neurodiversity, like and getting them off the screen is a big meltdown, and then it creates conflict, and now they don't like each other. So parents are quite focused on that right now, especially peaceful parents trying to figure out ways to decrease screen use. But what you're saying is a key element here is there's another big component we need to focus on, which is content. When we do allow screens, what's the
Yeah.
content that's being
Right.
consumed? And
Right.
yes, when they're like watching TV or something on whatever, like on a show where you can see it, that's one thing. But if they're older and they're reading or they're on Reddit or they're watching YouTube videos without and shorts without you seeing, especially if they have their own device, like their own phone or whatever,
Oh, yeah.
there has to be this level of review of content. Um, So yeah, I love that you're touching on that. And then the community piece, I have a membership for parents, which is exactly for that reason, so that we can de-shame what the challenges are and then get to work on like what are you doing? What are you doing? Share ideas and figure out what's working right now for the challenges. But yeah, it's very, especially in the United States, the epidemic of loneliness, parents, feel that for sure. And it's hard to find a community sometimes that aligns with your values, especially related to parenting like this, right? Parenting boys, particularly with more vulnerabilities and compassion for themselves and the external world.
Right. Well, I mean, a couple things. One is that communities don't have to be just local. I mean,
Yeah,
you're in Arkansas, I'm in California, and here we are talking. And frankly,
yeah,
most of the people I'm dealing with don't live in the Bay Area. And so
yeah,
there is that possibility of extending your community, and obviously it creates a level of ease that you don't have to travel for it. So
right.
I'm a believer in community that can really develop online. So
Hmm.
one thing. The second thing I think that where parents could often do it a little better is to truly be curious about what their kids are experiencing. Because I think a lot of times, don't get off your phone. Don't be doing that. Come on, you've been how many hours have you been on your phone? And they have
Yeah,
this kind of pejorative tone to it, which is completely lacking in curiosity. And so if you really want to get to know your kids better, show genuine interest and curiosity. So what do I'm curious, not just, hey, I'm curious. And you can feel the difference in that. I'm really curious. What are you listening to? What are you watching now? Versus, I'm really curious. I want to understand more what you. I don't know. Kid, come on, leave me alone. Well, okay. Well, I know you want me to leave you alone, but it's my responsibility as your parent to understand more about what's going. No, it isn't. Well, you can say that right now, but obviously you're not living on your own. I don't mean to hold that over to you as just simply a power move. It's just a reality now. And so this is part of our relationship. Over time, it will change as you become older and you become an adult. And I'm completely open to shifting that relationship. But in the meantime, right now, this is the way things are. And I want to have an open channel with you.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I love that. And in peaceful parenting, we talk about starting this really early. So when they're like two, three,
Exactly.
4, and they want you to see their toy and their drawing, show that
Exactly.
curiosity so that they don't feel like you're cherry picking the tough conversations and trying to take
Exactly.
away their fun and trying to, you have an agenda versus it's very unconditional, like all of you, the light and appreciations, but also when it's hard, I want you to know that I want to know about what's going on for you.
Exactly.
Because then it's more authentic and the kid feels that.
100%. And I would extend that to all relationships, frankly.
Yeah, I love that.
One of the things that I see very often is that people in general get feedback that's critical or negative in some
Yeah.
experience is negative, but they don't get appreciations and acknowledgments. And as someone who's worked in organizations and I've done a good amount of leadership coaching and just team development in my day, it's amazing how people don't share the positive things. I mean, it's amazing to me how often I'll hear something, oh, that person did really great job or whatever. And I say, did you say anything?
Yeah.
No. Like, what the fuck? Excuse my language.
Yeah.
But seriously,
Yeah.
like that is encouraging a relationship and a connection. And if people are
Mm-hmm.
only getting the negative, if they wind up shutting down because every time you open your mouth, it's like, now what am I going to hear? So there
Yeah.
has to be a
Yeah.
real good balance there. And I think that when you really have someone's best interest in mind, as well as your own best interest in mind, you can give uh, critical feedback in a positive and compassionate way. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's a term now in starting to develop called compassionate accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Really about how do you hold other people accountable and yourself accountable in a compassionate way rather than I gotcha and you're a jerk and I'm here to clobber you over the head way.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I love that. Healthy self-esteem for ourselves, but also accountability for the other. And I think you're right. Like it's the foundation of a healthy relationship and it goes into adulthood, but we can teach our kids this in the home by demonstrating this exchange. So then when they get older, they think it's normal and they expect it
Exactly.
from others. And if they don't get it, they're like, this person's not somebody I want to hang around. It's different than it's the family thing. It's different from home. It doesn't feel familiar. Home sweet home, right? So if we can make the home a place where they have these experiences, then they project that into the future
Yeah.
and their other relationships and filter who they connect with.
And I also really want to totally accent what you said a couple minutes ago, which is when you start really early,
Yeah,
with this relationship, showing interest and curiosity and connection, it's a heck of a lot easier,
right.
more fruitful and healthier to be doing it when they're 14. If you start like if you ignore them and just let them go off by themselves, and then suddenly you become the critical parent, it just doesn't work well because they see you as an enemy and not an
Mm-hmm.
ally. But if you've been an ally throughout their lives, it just becomes a natural part of the process, as part of the development
Yeah.
experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I love that. And I'd love for you to talk about maybe some practical ways to foster empathy and vulnerability in boys, maybe at different ages. I don't know if you want to touch on that, but um, I mean, the key thing that I always teach parents is become a resilient parent, and then your child will mirror that. It's like the easiest thing is just to like, what do you want your child to become? Then you must become that
Right.
because like 80% of the information is just nonverbal and it's just filtering through the environment. The other, whatever, I don't know what percent, I'm just saying 80%, but seems like the majority is just the moments in between our conscious awareness. So the more we can unconsciously become the best version of ourselves, the version we want our kids to become, the more we can influence them. But anything specific to when we are conscious and intentional with empathy and vulnerability with boys.
Yeah, I have to say this. Are you suggesting not going by the idiom of do what I say, not what I do?
Yes, I am. It's just
No,
ineffective. It's
I,
not
right.
effective.
Well, exactly, because if you think about how people learn, it's through modeling and imitation.
Yeah.
And sadly, a lot of times it's also through intimidation.
Yes, through fear.
Right.
But that's a short term, it seems like, and an unpleasant kind of,
It is short
they would
term, but
prefer maybe something else. But yeah, if there's an option.
unfortunately, it's also longer term in terms of its impact, right?
Yes,
So
it's
I
true.
think that the first order of business, and I think that you're touching on this, is that the parents need to do their own work,
Yeah.
because they, shockingly enough, have grown up in the same culture. Obviously it changes over time, but if you really have the belief that vulnerability is bad, especially in boys, it's going to come out, in some way. So it's going to be triggering. We
Hmm.
dislike in others what we don't want to see in ourselves.
Yeah.
And so when a parent, and this goes for mothers also, this is, I mean, a lot of times it falls on the feet of the fathers, like they're the ones who are doing this. I've seen enough times where mothers are
Hmm.
triggered by their son's vulnerability, and they say, "Don't
Yeah.
do that." Now some
Right.
of it is kind of on some level an attempt to help the child because they know that the world is the way the world is, and they
Yeah.
don't want the kid to expose themselves by crying in third grade and getting shamed, for doing that. So, I get that part of it, but a lot of it has to do with it's triggering something in them that's actually unresolved. And so
Hmm.
parents, do thy work, because the best thing you can do as a parent is to be healthy. And so, as you're saying,
Yeah.
be resilient there, and that health is obviously underlying all resilience. So it's like really feeling that's okay, because like as much as I resonate with the word vulnerability, let's deconstruct it for a moment. Like it literally means openness to attack, right? And so it depends on the context. In a sporting
Uh-huh.
context, what do? You look for your opponent's vulnerability so you can exploit them.
Right.
That's the deal. But the thing is, I think just in general, people need to learn about context switching, meaning that
I love that.
it's okay to be competitive in certain environments where the environment is set up in a certain way for the rules are such that that's what we're doing. That's the nature of
Mm-hmm.
the beast there. But a lot
Right.
of times it's not like that, so it's like, for example, you learn as guys to be competitive, competitive, competitive. Okay, then you come home and in your marriage, or friendships, you're doing the same thing, and that doesn't work that well. So to be able to recognize that there's complexity and that you can like bring out different parts of yourself in different
Yes.
contexts, and that has to do with kind of an emotional fluidity. And so vulnerability, meaning openness to attack, is something that really takes courage, to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the things that I've been really working on is looking at new ways of looking at courage. Because courage has generally been seen, like at least from a male perspective, running into the burning building or fighting for your country or, providing, protecting, and all that. Some of the
Yeah.
traditional ways that guys are raised and that's seen as courage, right? Uh,
And I would just add to that, like running into a burning building, that also is vulnerability because now you're opening yourself to attack. That fire
Absolutely.
can kill you, but you're going towards it. Why are you doing that? Because I guess, because you think you have enough resources and tools to handle it and that you can survive it. But if it was just like a suicide attack, you wouldn't do it. So even
Absolutely.
that has a twist of vulnerability in
They
a
all
manly way.
they all do, but we don't talk about it as such. Like even some
Right.
of the old beliefs are like he's like the old John Wayne movies. He stormed the shores of Iwo Jima and he wasn't afraid at all. Come on, give me a break. I mean, these
Yeah.
are these stupid standards that have been passed down, and
Uh-huh.
they give impossible uh, orientations for guys to uphold because it's just not human, to do that. It's
Right.
actually ignorant to not be driven by one's anxiety on some level because anxiety itself is to some degree a signal about danger, and if you don't pay attention to
Mhm.
that, which many people don't, that leads you into a territory where you really are exposing yourself to unnecessary risk, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so, but I think what underlies vulnerability is openness. It's
Yeah.
like we're being vulnerable, not to be vulnerable. And I think that it's a means towards something. It,
Right.
it's a process. It's not like I would never say to someone, like, the ultimate goal in life is to be vulnerable. I don't think that's true at all. I think
Yeah.
vulnerability allows you to develop, to live through other values, right?
Like connection and parenting. We
Exactly,
have to be vulnerable with our children and them with us so that we can connect on a deep level
exactly,
and feel emotional safety so we can share and communicate what's bothering us so we can
absolutely,
process.
exactly. And that's good role modeling because it shows your humanity and it shows
Mhm.
that that's okay to be feeling that way. And those messages are that it's normal, to feel this. It's like you can feel, really insecure and anxious at times, but that doesn't
Yeah.
define who you are. You can feel really
Right.
confident and secure and on top of the world, but that also doesn't define
Right.
who you
It's a
are.
part of you, not all of you.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's where some of the freedom lies. It's like
Yeah.
recognizing that you can see
Hmm.
different parts of yourself. Like I know for me as someone who I led weekly men's groups for 40 years, so,
Uh-huh.
and I've worked with many men in many contexts and many, many, many thousands of hours there. And one of the things I've heard as feedback was that when I showed my vulnerability, it was freeing for them. Because I think people naturally project authority onto authority figures, which in that case I certainly was the authority figure in there. Never wrong, never in doubt. Like, and that's nonsense. It's just not human. So I think
Hmm.
that presenting ourselves and accepting ourselves as being lovely, flawed human
Right.
beings who are on our own journey and we have our own stuff to deal with. I mean, I'm 71 right now. I'm still working on things. I'm
Right.
leading numerous groups. My nonprofit, I'm just very involved with, a bunch of different people, but I don't present myself, as I got it all together. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm constantly asking for help, which is seen as not
Yeah.
terribly masculine by the world. But I think that's BS, right? And so for me, I think about what are my values, and I'm looking at, frankly, like to me, what drives me is really wanting a paradigm shift. Because I think that the old male paradigm of strength with no heart and we see that really beckoning a lot these days because as a newer paradigms are emerging, the old has a way of, shall we say, regressing into the past.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
it's old paradigms don't die easily at all.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
part of what's occurred is that, you know, there's been this message to guys, and I'm sure you hear it with boys. It's like you should be more vulnerable. You should be more like a girl. And
Right.
which is terrible branding for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's missing something. And so to some degree, there's a sense of like, let your sister lead. It's time for women. And I'm all about egalitarianism and equity. So this is not a statement that boys or men should be in charge or that there should be male privilege at all. That's not my point. My point is that that's terrible messaging. I would like to see a world where people can just be simply people, and they don't have to,
Right.
you know, you know, be behind someone or be in front of someone. And sometimes, it's good to be behind and be in front, but that's
Yeah.
again context switching, and so
Yeah.
I like to see a world where what I call strength with heart, because I think a lot of times some of these guys have learned like don't show any sense of power, and so they kind of present as heart with no strength. And so there's these
Hmm.
dueling paradigms that are going on, and
Yeah.
they're going to go on like, what do I do, with this? Where do I fit in? Like, I'm going to be this jerk, strength with no heart, but I don't want to be a wimp as heart with no strength,
Right.
And
Right.
I'm saying that they're not mutually exclusive. In fact,
Right.
both of them are, when they're integrated, it's much better, because, you can have boundaries, you can say no.
Right.
You don't have to just say yes to something you don't want to appear and appease. Like, I'm really a nice person. After all, accept me as I am. Like, that's not an appealing uh, image for guys. And I see a lot of
Hmm.
that part of what you mentioned, the manosphere, earlier, is that they grab some of these guys and pull them in. Yeah, you can be tough, and you can be and take no prisoner, and that actually feeds misogyny. It kind of feeds into this whole dynamic, that occurs. So I think it's tragic, that it occurs,
Hmm.
and I know that my work is really trying to present an alternative to that. And so
Hmm. Hmm.
my groups and my nonprofit is called the Men and Boys Compassion Coalition, and we have a group in there called Young Guys Thrive, and it's really about how do you thrive as a young guy in a world that's so crazy right now
Hmm.
that is judging you for being guys. I mean, this is the first time that I'm aware of in human history where it's seen as uncool to be male. You know,
Interesting. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
judging and shame. You should be ashamed of your maleness, especially if you're white. Now, I know that sometimes that can come across as, oh, I'm a men's rights activist or whatever, but I feel like I stand
Yeah.
in the middle of these cultural dynamics. I'm going like too extreme in one direction, two extremes in
Right.
either direction, and there is a middle path. And
Yeah.
middle path is not part of the old paradigm, and it's not part of this, guys should just be step aside, you know,
Yeah.
paradigm. It's a paradigm where it's based on equity and equality, but it's based on self-esteem, and
Yeah.
self-compassion and caring, and you can be successful, and you can be cool, and you can be kind.
Right. Which is exactly what we think about in parenting. That's the kind of parent we want to be. You can be in charge of the household and you can be the leader and you make the final decision, but you don't have to dole out punishments, threats, and consequences in a mean way. You can
Exactly.
set healthy limits and firm limits, very firm, immovable mountains of limits. When you decide it's a no, it's a no, but do we have to be mean about it when we deliver it, right? So it's a very powerful stance that we can take as parents. Peaceful parenting, conscious parenting isn't like permissive. It's not this gentle, like you're saying, it's like men are supposed to be gentle, they're supposed to be feminized. It's bad to be a man nowadays because we've lost your like edge, right? Like you've lost your protection, too much vulnerability.
Right.
Same with this parenting thing. And whether you're the father or the mother parent, it doesn't really matter. Both can embody the same qualities of leadership,
Absolutely.
which is what you're basically describing to me as leadership of any kind.
Exactly. That's exactly.
Yeah. And being a leader of ourselves. So for boys and men and masculinity, girls, women, femininity, what kind of leader does this situation call for? And coming from a leadership background, and I know you have a leadership experience in the institutes, it just depends on the scenario. If you can have a female CEO, a male CEO, whatever, like what does the situation call for and who's got the strongest skill set to tackle this challenge and come out the other side more successfully, right? It doesn't matter if you're a guy or a girl. It's about solving the challenge, overcoming the obstacle and it's a teamwork thing too, building people and making sure you
Exactly.
have the team that goes with you.
Exactly. And one of the traits that underlies that capacity is humility.
Yes.
And just recognizing your skill set and your mindset and where you're at. I mean, I know for me, I'm I'm frankly super good visionary. I see the connections between things. I'm a great lateral thinker. I just see the way things are connected. I'm not good
Uh-huh.
linear. I'm not good operationally. And
Mm-hmm.
so what do I do? Instead of pretending, oh, I know everything, I'm in charge of everything,
Yeah.
I do everything, which is complete BS. I
Yeah.
I have people, in my orbit, and I just acknowledge that I'm just not good at that. Help me with that.
Right.
And
Right.
having the
Surrounding yourself with people that can provide a bigger strength to the chain, the links of the chain, right? Versus relying on one person to be the strength of the entire chain.
because it's very egotistic or
Yeah.
narcissistic way that, and our culture supports that, right? And it's not getting any better with social media. Look at me, and look at my Instagram pages, and I'm so cool. When meanwhile, they're probably suffering like heck, but they're
Yeah.
presenting a lovely image out there. And
Mm-hmm.
then people look at that image and they go, oh my God, that person's so much better. And so this social comparison is getting activated big time these days. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
certain that happens with parents because I'm sure that a lot of times that parents are presenting themselves as, well, we have a healthy, happy family. We're on vacation here. We're this and that. Oh God, I don't know if we have enough money to go on vacation. They're so much better than us. What's wrong with us? And so you go into this shame reaction, and shame leads
Mm-hmm.
you to hide. And so it's so ironic and I think sad that what gets activated in people is totally counterproductive in terms of living a healthy life because you wind up hiding and sequestering yourself
Yeah.
and not
Mm-hmm.
revealing any vulnerabilities then by presenting a tough exterior when actually
Yeah.
you need to allow yourself to be seen. And of course, part of that has to do with who do you allow yourself to be seen with. So I don't think any you don't you I don't recommend revealing one's vulnerabilities to just anyone. I mean, some people are just like
Right.
just like uh, almost like they're at a cashier, in a food market, and the cashier says, "How you doing?" You go, "Oh, I'm so glad you asked. I mean, you're not.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah,
not an
yeah.
appropriate place to be doing that. But you got to feel people out, in some way. And to me, the vulnerability test is a connection test, right? And I know
Yes.
as someone who has been a very early adapter of expressing vulnerability, and that, I was terrified, expressing things to potential friends, or when I was younger, a woman, or, just,
Hmm.
you know, anyone, not just anyone, but someone I wanted something different with. I was terrified to do that. I still have anxieties come up about revealing some vulnerabilities, but there are times when, like, people have heard me speak, and they say, "God, you allowed yourself to be so vulnerable." And the truth is, I didn't feel vulnerable because I've integrated that. I
Yeah.
could say things that were vulnerable at one point, but I don't feel open to attack. I've done it so many times with so many people in so many contexts over so many years that it's integrated. So to
Hmm.
me, the goal is more openness than vulnerability itself. And because openness
Uh-huh.
is is the passageway into connection. And I think that the more people really practice vulnerability, you start to get your land legs, so to speak, and it becomes integrated into you. And so you
Yeah.
live more from that place.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I love what you're saying. Um, yeah, and from a parenting perspective, some of the things that we end up coaching parents on is like when you have like a teen boy and he still willingly opens up to you and is able to cry at home, it's okay to say, like, you know what? I don't expect you to cry in front of your sports team. I don't expect you to cry in front of your friends and in public. If it's not safe, you have to feel out individual friendships and see, like, whatever. But there is a distinct difference for young men. One relationship is safe to expose my vulnerabilities with, and maybe that's just at home right now, but when I go out into the world, I do put on like a
Yeah,
zippered boundary where
yeah,
I'm saying I'm not going to show you everything because I don't feel so readily open in this environment. It doesn't feel safe enough. It's the safety piece, right?
100%.
But it's okay to start there because at least then they can focus on connection with people individually and filtering who is a safe person to share with, and then building it on a one-on-one kind of relationship level versus just opening up vulnerably to everybody.
And sometimes you just don't know. I mean, there's going to be some risk factor. It's not like,
Yes,
oh, okay, I know for sure I can be vulnerable with this person at
right,
this time.
right,
I'm going to do that because it's actually not vulnerable then because I got it all dialed up, dialed in and
right.
buttoned up, and it's just not
Yeah.
like. I mean, I've heard so many people say like, uh, I'm waiting to feel safe enough to reveal myself, right? And I go, okay,
Which is the opposite, I guess, of vulnerability is what you're saying. If you, yeah, the
yeah,
vulnerability inherently includes an element of sensitivity that could hurt.
absolutely, and trust develops by doing that and having it reciprocate or having it at least be
Right.
understood or empathized,
Yeah.
with. And
Hmm.
so I don't think you can develop a deep trust in a relationship unless you have kind of done that. And so
Right.
a lot of times people put the heart, the heart, essentially, I was going to say the cart before the horse, but maybe maybe that was a good slip on my part, that
Yeah.
they don't show their heart,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
I don't think you really develop a deeper connection unless you really do that.
Yeah. And do you believe in parenting then, as we kind of encourage our kids to take these risks in relationships with other people, that before they can start taking those risks, they need to know that we're like the safe home base? That,
It helps.
we can't predict what other people will do, but we're going to do our best to love them unconditionally. And even if when we screw up and hurt them, we'll come back and repair and reconnect on a reliable kind of build that trust with us first.
And that goes back to something you said some time ago, which is it starts early. You know,
Yes.
You don't just give that message. I mean, you could, but I would not recommend it. You don't just start that message at 12 years old. That
Yeah.
is a message that it is safe here, and to keep bringing that, because those neuromuscles, are developed, early on. So it becomes part of
Yeah.
something like neural architecture, there.
Hmm.
And you do it
Hmm.
later on, and it's not like those receptors are
Yeah.
necessarily developed. They can be developed later, certainly, for sure, but it's much easier when they're developed earlier.
Yes, for sure. And there'll definitely be parents listening to this podcast that are like, oh, well, I have a 17-year-old and we have trouble and he slams the door and walks out on me and I can't even stop him. He's big and he can just leave. And what am I supposed to do? So while, like we said, it's not ideal, it will be harder. Where should those parents start?
With themselves and their willingness to be vulnerable with their kid, like acknowledging that they screwed up in certain ways, that they weren't there in certain ways, and that they wish they had. And talk about their own childhood and how they learned. I mean, one of the things that I've seen that's so helpful for kids is when they hear about their own parents' narrative, what it was
Yes.
like for them as a kid, what their father and mother was like, the messages that they got. Because then they
Yeah.
start to go, oh, this is transgenerational, experience that's happened. I just happen to be, on this rung of Jacob's ladder, so to speak. And there's this,
Yeah.
that, and then, and I'm telling you this, parent, because I, I'm wanting you to be better than I was. You're
Hmm.
young, I've come to realize that the errors of my ways, there, and I want to just acknowledge that. Well, you're a real asshole, I can't believe you did that. I can understand why you would think that. I have my own self-judgments, about that. I
Hmm.
wish I had done it differently. I feel some shame about it. I can't change the past, but we
Hmm.
can really change the future direction. And I'm committed to being a better parent there, and being a more open parent with you. So it definitely,
That takes a lot of vulnerability for a parent to say,
yeah,
because the
absolutely,
kid might say, like you said, you're a real whatever, or I don't care about your stuff, whatever. I'm walking out and
yeah,
reject you, rejection,
yeah,
right, of the
yeah,
relationship.
yeah. And that's, you got to keep doing your own work. I mean,
Yeah.
if there was some nice, easy, sweet formula, like you just do this and then you get that, wouldn't that be lovely,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yes.
not like that in life. That's why
Right.
I'm always kind of laugh about this thing about, it's not rocket science, that if they just as if that's the penultimate of difficult things. Well, I've worked with rocket scientists, and I can tell you that they go, man, relationships are much harder than rocket
Yeah.
science. I remember this one young uh, scientist at Kennedy Space Center he was like drawing this line. So with relationships, it's kind of like it can go here and then go there, and you never know where it's going to go, which is true. You don't know. That's why it's vulnerable. With rocket
Yeah. Yeah.
science, you get the
Yeah.
right formula and it works. It's just like that's
Right.
just
It's math and physics.
exactly.
But humans are much more complicated than a math equation, even if it's
As it,
calculus or whatever.
as it turns
It's
out,
unpredictable. Yeah.
indeed.
Yeah. I know I have so many more questions I'd love to pick your brain on. As we wrap up, I just love to just one quick other topic is anger in boys. Um, how can we help boys understand and express anger without shaming them or encouraging
Right,
aggression? Maybe we can kind of end on that.
right. Well, from an evolutionary perspective, you start to look at, well, all human emotions have some survival value.
Hmm.
And when we shame any of those, it basically creates a kind of emotional constipation. And anger has been seen by evolutionary psychologists, which makes sense to me, as an experience that someone or someone's have transgressed on one's boundaries. Now that doesn't mean that everyone would agree that there was a transgression. It's perceptual. I perceive that you are. You know, someone could look you look and you go, hey, well, you looking at, you know, like, and it's like they're paranoid and they took it, you know, in a certain way. So we have to, you know, distinguish between quote perception and reality, which seems to be relevant for every part of life, right? You know, and
Yeah.
so what is hurting? What are you lacking? What do you feel like? What's going? Like I get that you're pissed off, and to not be intimidated, you know, by anger and or judgmental, because again, a lot of times, like healer, heal thyself, parent, heal thyself. Like, what about your anger as a parent? What about your unexpressed anger? You know, what about your expressed anger and unresolved anger? How was anger used in your family? How was it used as a form of control? I mean, it's very complex because generally, a lot of
Hmm.
times, what's going on with anger is that there's underlying hurt, an underlying threat experience. And anger is where
Hmm.
get out of my space, get
Yeah.
away from me. So to some degree, it's an attempt to gain sovereignty. And so I would really like look at like I can acknowledge you. I'm sure you have very good reasons for being angry, you know. And if you want to be a successful person, you know, you need to find a way to work with that. So I'm not here to shame that, but how do we work with that in a way that we look at what's the unmet need, you know,
Right.
underlying that anger. And again, if you start doing that when a kid's 16 years old, it's a lot harder. Now, some of
Yeah.
the parents who are listening, they haven't done it, and the kid's 16, and it's kind of like the idea of like when's the best time to plant a tree?
Yeah.
20 years ago. When's the next
Yeah.
time? Today. And that's
Today.
the way it is. You can just say, I wish I had
Yeah.
done that in the past. Well, you didn't. You got to get
Yeah.
over. You didn't do it in the past. That doesn't mean you can't do it right now. And that
Right.
it's harder. Just like if you haven't gotten in shape, you haven't exercised in 20 years, you start exercising, it sucks. You know, it's hard. It's always hard, frankly, but you know, it's just like you just do it and you have to develop the muscles. But you have to
Yeah.
believe that by the practice of it, you get better. You don't get perfect.
Yeah.
That's why I think practice makes perfect. Terrible saying.
Yeah. That's a great point.
It's nonsense. It
Yeah.
doesn't make perfect. It just makes better.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that leadership book. Don't let great be the enemy of good. It's like the growth mindset. We
Right,
need progress, not perfection
right,
as motivation. Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. With the anger reframe. And for girls, it's usually the opposite. Nobody likes an angry girl, but anger is your defense against vulnerability, like some kind of injury maybe, or
Yeah, I mean,
sadness or grief. So what's the unmet need? How can you express that without um, transferring your anger to somebody else in a right
totally
harmful
understandable.
way?
Girls who have so much anger, like the level of incursions. You know, I think one of the things, and I know we're going to, one of the things that guys just don't understand a lot, don't understand is really how scared girls and women are of men, boy or
Oh, but have you heard that latest like viral thing about the who would you pick in the woods? Would it be the
oh yeah,
man or the bear? I think
exactly.
that really surprised and shocked a lot of men. Like, what do you mean you would pick the bear? And the woman's like, the bear will just gut me alive and kill me pretty quickly. I don't know what you're gonna do, right? It's
Right?
like I'd rather pick that bear that I know is very
Yeah,
primitive and would probably take me out, but at least I know what to expect.
yeah. I think we need to really develop more empathy for each other. Like one of the groups that we're
Right.
developing, the Men and Boys Compassion Coalition, is men and women
Yeah.
together. You
Uh-huh.
know, like really
Yeah.
having uh, empathic, compassionate dialogues instead of this vitriol. I mean, that's part
Right.
of the changing paradigms. Like we need to create more understanding. What is it like to be you, really?
Right.
Right?
Right.
And we
Right. And
just
how
have
you
to figure out
experience the world.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, amazing to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know this is just, again, scratching the surface, but would you share just a little bit about where people can find out more about your work? And we'll definitely link those resources for your website below. But if there's a particular place you would steer people that are listening on audio podcast, what
Sure.
website would that be?
Well, under the Global Compassion Coalition, there was globalcompassioncoalition.org. There was
Mhm.
the Men and Boys Compassion Coalition, and you could find it there. And we're developing our website is going to be independent. We'll still be on there, but we're developing an independent website right now. So we're in development. So that's a lot of where my work is. I'm doing a little bit of leadership coaching still, and that is under
Mhm.
Rewire Leadership, Rewire leadership.com. So those would be the main places to attempt to connect with me.
Yeah,
Anyway, so lovely being with you, Dajana. I thought you asked great
thank you.
questions, and you are clearly tracking, and I think that what you're doing is super important. So I'm very encouraging of you, and
Yeah.
your work.
Yeah, thank you. And the parents listening to this, I know they're doing the hard work out there and trying to learn, the growth mindset. We don't have to have it perfect, but let's start somewhere. What can we do today that can shift a
Exactly.
little bit, plant a seed today, one little mustard seed with your boy or your daughter about what we talked about, and then build on it day by day. Um,
Right. Inch by
one
inch.
step in the right direction.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.